Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at George W. Bush's presidency and 9/11. We're going to just watch a short little video on George W. Bush and his presidency.
Although his presidency began with one of the highest approval ratings in history, George W. Bush was a controversial leader whose time in office was marked with war, debt, and economic recession.
George W. Bush is either the most overrated or underrated president in history. And it's kind of a mystery to figure out which one it is.
Born in New Haven, Connecticut on July 6, 1946, George W. Bush was the oldest child of George H.W. Bush, the 41st President of the United States.
Bush was a third-generation wealthy political family. His father, of course, was president. His grandfather was a senator. And he grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was a party animal in college. He kind of ducked and weaved when it came to the Vietnam War, serving in the National Guard. And he was someone with an alcohol problem.
After earning an MBA from Harvard in 1975, Bush became a successful businessman and later defeated a long-term incumbent Democrat to become the governor of Texas in 1994.
Ann Riches was the first woman elected governor in Texas, and she was popular. And I think her re-election was assumed. But George W. Bush went on to win that race, and it put him in position to enter the presidential race 5 years later.
After declaring his run for the presidency, Bush rivaled Al Gore in a highly contested election in 2000 that ended with the Supreme Court declaring Bush the 43rd President of the United States.
While George W. Bush did become president in 2000, we should remember that it was through one of the most controversial elections in U.S. history. It was the first time since 1888 that the popular vote and the Electoral College vote did not match.
8 months after his election, terrorists attacked the United States on September 11th, causing Bush to respond with the war on terror in the Middle East.
During his presidency, George Bush helped to lead the country through one of our darkest times, which was 9/11. However, George Bush will forever go down in history as the man who took this country to war, and it was a war over weapons of mass destruction, but no weapons of mass destruction were ever found.
Although he won re-election in 2004, Bush's favorability rating fell due to high unemployment rates, the subprime mortgage crisis, a multi-trillion-dollar budget deficit, and his response to Hurricane Katrina. George W. Bush left office in January 2009.
So we can see George W. Bush is going to win his first election against Al Gore, which really came down to Al Gore winning the popular vote and George W. Bush winning the Electoral College vote. And we talked about last time all that went into that and a lot of the controversies that were in it. But George W. Bush is going to be president during the terrorist attacks of 9/11 and also getting the United States into the war on terrorism. So now we're just going to watch a couple of short videos on 9/11.
It's around 8:45 a.m. Chilled morning in New York City, partly cloudy. In Boston, American Airlines Flight 11, bound for Los Angeles, has been hijacked. Then a news bulletin. An airplane flying due south has crashed into the upper level of the North Tower of the World Trade Centers. 9:03 a.m. A surreal event unlike anything in the history of the broadcast media. Countless viewers are watching live when suddenly an airplane is seen flying in an easterly direction. The plane swings around the southern end of the Second World Trade Tower and explodes on impact. 9:30 a.m. President Bush at an elementary school in Sarasota, Florida, goes on television live to announce the disaster.
Terrorism against our nation will not stand.
But even the president doesn't know just what is coming next. At 9:35 a.m., a third hijacked plane crashes into the Pentagon. There is no question now that the United States is under attack by terrorists. In Washington, the Pentagon, the Capitol, and the White House, as well as other government buildings, are evacuated. And Manhattan Island, incredibly, is sealed off. All bridges and tunnels are closed. And then, 9:59 a.m., a scene that will change New York for all time. the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. And just a half hour later, at 10:28, the North Tower goes down as well. New York's Twin Towers have disappeared. It has been less than 2 hours since the first attack in New York City. An unimaginable number of people are dead and injured. The southern end of New York City's famous skyline has vanished. Nothing will ever be the same again. In a street-side news conference near the terrible devastation of the World Trade Centers, New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani said, "I have a sense it's a horrendous number of lives lost. I don't know yet. Right now, we have to focus on saving as many lives as possible."
September 11th, 2001. A day of grief. A day of courage. This is how that day unfolded.
My daughter called me. She said, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center. I said, nah, you gotta be kidding. It's gotta be a Piper Cub or some clown was flying down the river.
At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston, with 92 aboard, traveling at a speed of 470 miles per hour, strikes the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex. Within minutes, officials coordinate the citywide emergency response. Their base of operations is a state-of-the-art command center located on the 23rd floor of 7 World Trade Center. With one tower in flames, the tragedy is only beginning. It is 9:03 when United Airlines Flight 175, with 65 aboard, traveling at the speed of 590 miles per hour, smashes into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. This aircraft strikes the corner of the South Tower. It rips a diagonally shaped gash from the 84th to the 78th floors. The South Tower lasts only 56 minutes before it succumbs at 9:59 a.m. The dust cloud billows outward for blocks. Victims stagger away. At 10:28, the television mast atop the North Tower spears straight down.
Once the collapse started, there really wasn't any way to stop it. It was just going to go all the way down once it got started.
Chaos in New York City. Power is down in Lower Manhattan. Phone lines jammed with more than 230 million calls. Hundreds of firefighters trapped in the towers. Hundreds more race to the scene. Falling debris from the collapse of the North and South Towers ignites fires in the neighboring buildings of the World Trade Center. World Trade 4, 5, and 6 are ablaze. World Trade 7, the building housing the city's command center, burns unchecked for 7 hours. At 5:20, it collapses. The city's emergency nerve center is destroyed.
Somewhere in that time, and it's very hard to keep track of time during this, they had been ordered to evacuate number 7 by the Port Authority. To this day, we don't know who gave that order, but whoever it was saved a lot of people's lives.
With New York a war zone, some residents walk across the Brooklyn Bridge to get out of the city. Others seek escape in vessels piloted by the Army Corps of Engineers. At 7:45 p.m., the New York Police Department says 78 officers are missing and estimates that 200 firefighters are dead. At 10:56 p.m., Police officials say they believe there are victims alive in the rubble of the World Trade Center.
Working with urban search and rescue teams, there was a lot of areas to be searched underneath the debris field. There were voids that had to be searched for possible live people.
September 11th, 2001, the longest and most tragic day in New York's history, is drawing to a close.
So those videos show you a little bit of the timeline of what happened on 9/11. There was a third plane that was supposed to go towards the nation's capital, but the passengers of that plane were able to take back over control, and they crashed the plane into a field in Pennsylvania, saving lives. You can see this is the Pentagon. 9/11 was one of those moments that a generation never forgets. Anyone who was old enough who lived through 9/11 can tell you where they were, what they were doing, probably what they were wearing, because the world changed after 9/11. It was no longer safe. We knew that terrorists could attack. Following 9/11, we are going to see new procedures implemented into airports, things that U.S. students take as the norm, such as not being able to carry so much liquids, having to go through the scanners. It wasn't like that before 9/11. The having where if you go out, especially out west, and they have these large dams that there's constant surveillance, you can't go on those. That didn't used to be the case. But really, for most Americans, this feeling of security is kind of wiped away with this, and the nation will mourn, and it will bring up new challenges and new questions about how to keep the United States safe. And one of the ways that Congress, with the approval of President Bush, will be to help what they believe to keep the America safe is what is known as the Patriot Act. And I have two different pictures here depicting two different viewpoints of the Patriot Act. You can see that for some people, the Patriot Act was protecting the United States. For others, they saw it as giving up their freedoms. And so we're just going to watch a short little overview video on what the Patriot Act was.
It was passed in the wake of 9/11 and calls for new and vast powers for US intelligence agencies understandably had lots of backing. The reforms, known as the Patriot Act, according to President Bush, were designed to prevent another attack like the one on September 11th. It essentially gave organisations like the NSA more access to internet records, made it easier to tap phones, and made it easier to share intelligence information.
Today we take an essential step in defeating terrorism while protecting the constitutional rights of all Americans.
US politicians who penned the law knew that there was a fine line between the right to privacy and keeping American citizens safe. So a 5-year sunset clause was inserted into the Act. It was routinely renewed until shocking revelations by Edward Snowden threw a giant spanner into the works.
They also found that they unreasonably intrude into the private lives of ordinary citizens, individuals who have never been suspected of any wrongdoing or criminal activity.
Since then, the mass surveillance debate has raged on, and the revelations revealed by Mr. Snowden brought into question how useful such widespread powers actually are. Snowden announced the Patriot Act was secretly being used to justify the collection of phone records from millions of Americans.
So it's just a little bit on the Patriot Act. It basically expanded the powers that the federal government had to look at what American citizens were doing. We're also going to see the creation of a new department, a new secretary under the president, and this will be the Department of Homeland Security. And so we are going to end our session today. Next time we'll be talking about the war on terrorism and the war in Iraq.